It always takes like a couple more seconds for it to go live on Rockfin.
Oh yeah.
All right, welcome everyone to Frank Analysis. I'm your host Franco, and I'm joined today by a fantastic cast here. We have Magnus, Panvidya, Skeptical Mantis, and Reed Coverdale of the Naturalist Capitalist. We're gonna talk about the Second Amendment, but we're gonna have that conversation over at Rockfin. Right now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a little warm-up session. We're going to give an introduction of each other, what exactly is our ideology, and then I'll also give some time here for the guests to ask each other a couple questions before we move on to the main topic about the Second Amendment. So we will start with Reed from the Naturalist Capitalist. What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing well. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yep.
good.
All right. Sorry, I will be coming on with video later on, but I got to do audio right now.
You're fine, man. Yeah, so go ahead and give like a brief summary about your ideology.
Yeah, so I used to be a Republican like 6 years ago, and it's just been a slow descent into anarchy from there. I would say now I am an anarchist. I don't believe in any government. So that means the warfare state, the welfare state, the surveillance state, any of it. I just don't think we need any of it. So out of practicality, I am a libertarian because they're the only movement that really seems to want to shrink government everywhere. Other people talk about it, but they don't really want to do it. Other people talk about wanting a stateless society eventually, but they want to grow the state exponentially first in order to reach that. So I would, I guess the easiest way to describe myself is I'm an anarcho-capitalist. But I also think that in an anarchist society, different ideologies can coexist as long as they respect each other's rights. So as long as, anarcho-communists respect the property rights of anarcho-capitalists, if they want to live in different communities, I don't really see any issues there. It's when one ideology thinks that everybody else needs to conform to their same ideas that you have issues. So I'm a live and let live person. I believe in the individual. I don't believe in collectivism. I think collectivism is what drives division and also dehumanizes people. That's kind of how every single authoritarian regime has justified snuffing out part of the population they don't like. They turn them into a collective and then convince you that they're lesser than you. I believe in individuals, individual rights, individual ideas, and I think that's the only way a society can really flourish.
All right, so go ahead, Magnus Panvidya, returning to the show. Go ahead and give your introduction.
Hi, I'm Magnus. I'm a Boogaloo boy, one of the primary representatives of the Unity Coalition. I am also an anarchist. I'm a little more of a mutualist. I kind of believe in kind of mutual markets and cooperative, small scale association between individuals. I definitely kind of, echo some of the things Reed said about, people being able to choose what they want in their community. But I come at it more from kind of a centrist position of I wouldn't mind living in like a anarcho-communist situation or pretty much any kind of state society as long as it was very small and very decentralized. I very heavily push the idea of radical decentralism, that countries are too big, states are too big, some counties even are way too big, and that we have to kind of get back to local communities actually interacting with each other and neighbors working together and helping each other and actually, becoming a real neighborhood again of like-minded individuals that don't require, the state authority to take care of their, the most oppressed and the most disadvantaged in their community.
And we have Mac of the Skeptical Mantis YouTube channel. What's up, man? Returning to the show, go ahead and give your intro.
What's up, everybody? I don't know how many of you guys have seen my channel. I talk about the Black Panther Party. I comment on progressive topics. I have talked about communism as well. I'm very influenced by Maoism. I think I'm going to have an interesting conversation with these guys because after Jimmy Dore interviewed Magnus, he got a lot of hate, and I made a lot of videos defending Jimmy Dore talking to Magnus. And I think we have a lot more in common than certain people on the fake left want us to think. In fact, I think I have more in common with the Boogaloo Boy idea, at least expressed by Magnus, more in common with them than I have with certain people who consider themselves to be left and progressive.
All right, there you have it, folks. And I am a post-partisan individual. I don't know exactly what to call my ideology, but I would say I lean socialist. I'm in the process of discovering myself and, you know, what exactly is my ideology as I learn. And I have these conversations with people. So I'm looking very forward to this conversation. Man, we're going to have a lot of fun here. But yeah, let's use this remaining time that we're here to ask each other questions. So based off of the introduction that you guys heard of each other, what questions would you like to ask each other?
I want to ask Reed about the whole idea of individual versus collectivism, because I think he said he was an anarcho-capitalist, right? Or a libertarian?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm just wondering, what kind of production do you envision happening on an individual scale? Because I think the individual versus collectivism argument is a little bit strange sometimes, because capitalism already has collectivized production. It's just the profits that are reaped by individuals. Does that make sense?
So you're asking how do we produce things as individuals?
Yeah, like what kind of individual or small scale production do you envision happening in a future society?
Well, sure. So valuing the individual doesn't mean that you can't come up with groups and you can't team up with people to come up with things. It's placing the the value of human rights or the value of what someone's identity is with the individual. That doesn't mean that you can't start a company with 6 other people, or you can't be into football, or people automatically collectivize. But I think what matters is the value of each individual. Instead of judging someone because they're white or black, or they're from the South, or they're from the North, or they're blue collar or white collar, or if they're Christian or atheist, I want to have a conversation with each person and find out what his deal is, like what he or she actually thinks about things, instead of applying these blanket labels to each other, because that's how the country has become divided so far, because they've divided us into right and left. And if you watch Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow, they've legitimately dehumanized the other half of the country. So it doesn't mean that.
Cut off a little bit.
You kind of cut off, Reed. You said it doesn't mean.
Ooh, did we lose him?
He'll probably come back. Or Reed?
I kind of bounce off of that.
Yeah.
I think particularly when people talk about collectivism, they kind of blur two different things together, to where there is collectivism in terms of like ideology, like someone like a Maoist may see, and then there's collectivism in the sense of like what Reed is talking about, of boiling people down to labels, to groups, and treating groups based off of those labels, and trying to put everybody like in a box. And you do see a lot of that, both from the right and the mainstream left nowadays, of just trying to say like, oh, this individual characteristic you hold means you believe this, or you feel this way. If you're left wing, you can't like guns. If you're right wing, you can't be like a hippie or something like that. And that's kind of, I think, what he's getting at in terms of the sort of collectivist in that form ideology.
Maybe he's referring to tribalism. I think
right. I feel like using, I feel like those get interchangeably used
to talk about that. Yeah, because yeah. All right, I think we're on the same page now.
Okay. Yeah, it was. I think he got some connection issues or something. But yeah, Magnus, you have any questions about Skeptical Mantis's ideology?
Yeah. So actually, like the thing I've always wanted to know, and I actually posed this question to Twitter, is why do you think that like more traditional liberals and more like center left Democrats types either are unaware or deliberately ignorant of like the armed left? And where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes out of fear and a certain kind of liberal respectability politics, where we've actually been taught to accept being disarmed and the idea that like guns are bad. And you know, I live in New York City. We have very strict gun laws, and a lot of people, I mean, it depends who you ask, of course, but a lot of people just have like fear surrounding guns. You know, when I grew up, I was taught that like the only people that have guns are like criminals and cops. Like there's no reason to have a gun. If you need to defend yourself, yeah, just fight it out, whatever. But I don't know, there's like that kind of stupid way of thinking. Like just because you have a gun doesn't mean you have to use it, but at least it's an option. That's how I see it. And right now we don't even have the option. They want us disarmed, you know? And a lot of it is like this liberal domination over the left. Like we conflate liberals with the left. I mean, this might be kind of like how would you say? Like a superficial way of seeing it. But one thing I always notice is, you know, Jimmy Dore's wife, Steph Zamorano, calls herself still the liberal, what is it? The miserable liberal. And that probably comes from a different time. You know, I'm sure she'd been calling herself that for years, but it's like for a time it was okay to say like, yeah, I'm liberal. But then eventually people started to wake up and see like what it is to be liberal is not really that progressive. And it's basically still imperialist and supporting Democrats, you know? So eventually that, like we're starting to outgrow that a bit, but I still think liberal ideology is still dominating the left, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, it always cracks me up when like someone on the right will be like Joe Biden is and his progressive leftist policies.
God.
I'm like, what the fuck do you mean? You know, like not at all. Like if you think Joe Biden is a leftist, I have a bridge to sell you. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. So we got Reed back. So Reed, Magnus pretty much piggybacked off of what you were saying, and Skeptical Mantis now says that he's on the same page now. So is there anything
Reed,
else you wanted to add on?
Can I ask a clarifying thing?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, Reed, we wanted to know if you were, when you were talking about collectivism, were you talking more about like tribalism? Like, is that what you were rejecting?
You know, I think once you start talking, I believe the smallest minority is in the individual. So when it comes to protecting rights, I think individual rights are what matter. Once you start grouping rights into different types of people, different religions, different sexes, and then you start separating people that way and dividing them, that's what I think is dangerous. You know, I think what matters is that we're all different and we all have our own stories. And so instead of, I mean, you could call it, what was the word you used?
Tribalism?
Yeah, sure. I mean, tribalism is an effect of collectivism, I would say. I don't know how would you describe collectivism in a positive way?
Collectivism in a positive way would just be the idea of everybody taking care of each other and working for the mutual good. And I think that's part of the ethic of socialism. But, you know, it has to go past being an ethic and into, like, we actually have to organize it to happen. I don't think it would contradict your conception, but maybe it would. Who knows? Because I don't see how anything could really be on an individual level. You know, everything we do is somehow related to other people. Like, damn, even hunter-gatherers, you know, work as groups. It's hard for me to imagine, like, what can I really achieve just purely on my own?
Right. So I think we're probably getting into a battle of semantics because a lot of the capitalist philosophers say the same thing about capitalism, that it's for the common good. You know, so I think it's good to not get stuck in a battle where we kind of have the same goal. I think a society that values individual rights over collective rights is more successful, because otherwise you end up with instances like the Japanese Americans being put in concentration camps because that's looked at as an overall good because it's safer for the entire nation. Or, you know, marginalizing Muslims. You know, if we were to do that to Muslims right now, if we were to put them in camps because we're worried about terrorist attacks or something, that's an instance where you're starting to weigh things on a collectivist level instead of an individual level. You're not judging those Japanese Americans as individuals. You're looking at them as a piece of a puzzle that might be, dangerous to the entire puzzle. So you're willing to compromise the rights of that group that's what I'm really worried about. And I think that is an easier place to arrive at when you look at people as a collective instead of as individuals.
If I could jump in really quick, I've actually like moderated a lot of debates like this, and I found like the key sticking point where like people don't understand is I know that Reed is more arguing from like a legalistic standpoint to where Mantis is more talking about like basic human nature and like day-to-day interactions between just individuals. So like you don't want a collective, like someone viewing in that way like a collectivist government of treating people like groups. But also Mantis is right of like the average group of people, they're going to immediately form into a group, and you don't want the law judging them for that or denying like their ability to be an individual within that group. So that's kind of like the weird, language kind of trip up. I always say that like 90% of political arguments are just people arguing over the definitions of words, and not the actual ideas behind them.
It could be. Can I specify that if you're talking about being against collective punishment or collective blame, I agree with that. There shouldn't be collective punishment or collective blame on any group of people in society. But we should address that these collectives do exist, whether we want to pretend they do or not. I would want to ask you guys, do you think white supremacy is a thing in the US or no?
Yeah, from my personal experience, 100%. I think like there's obviously, discussion over how big or influential it is, but I've seen it with my own eyes. I've, run into these people. There's still to this day, you're running into like local county commissioners and cops that have connections to the KKK and shit. So like it exists 100%. And they're definitely like racism is a very effective tool by the state to maintain their power and separate people and kind of get one part of the population to believe it's okay to treat the other part of the population like shit just because of some immutable characteristic.
For sure. Yeah. But I feel like sorry to cut in again. I want to hear your answer, Reed. I just want to say that white people have been very vulnerable to this white supremacist ideology. So in a way, eventually we can't say that they're just victims, being tricked or something like that. Eventually we do have to give them personal responsibility, and we have to recognize that white people as an overall collective have existed, and specifically white Americans have existed with certain political interests in this country, and they have been very willing to throw everybody else under the bus.
Yeah, and I can sorry, I was supposed to be Reed talk. I'll be really quick, but I can definitely agree that there is totally kind of like I wouldn't say a collective blame. I wouldn't go that far, but there's definitely like a willful ignorance among a lot of the American population of just how exactly like the federal government has gone about a lot of things when it comes to race relations, to the point where I was still getting into arguments with people just last week about the FBI finally admitting that they went and had a hand in killing Malcolm X, and a lot of like more conservative people still argue on about the civil rights movement and kind of deny how much the government itself that people voted for, that people supported with their tax dollars and were actually like participating in, were deliberately going after the civil rights movement.
Yeah, go ahead, Reed.
Yeah, so I think white supremacy exists, but I think it's a scapegoat for a lot of other problems. And I think that the establishment and giant corporations are fully fine with blaming white supremacy on issues that are caused by policies that they actually support and they want to throw the scent off. So a great example is, with police reform, there were so many laws that could have been changed, or just one, like end qualified immunity. That would have been a huge step. But that was thrown off by a race war, basically. It was it was turned into blaming the problem on racist cops instead of saying, hey, these cops can get away with murder. Let's make that illegal. Let's make that impossible. And then the other problem with the white supremacy blame is it goes at people who criticize Israel. I've had several of them on my show. They've been deplatformed for criticizing just giving how many billions of dollars a year we do to Israel and then not caring what they do with it, how they treat the Palestinians. So Yeah, I do think white supremacy is real and it's disgusting. And when it's a problem, we should call it out. But I think it's been used as a scapegoat for so many other issues that need addressing. And I think that the fake left, as you guys would call it, have completely embraced the accusation of white supremacy whenever someone says something controversial that they don't like. And I don't think that that's a good look. So I think it is. I think it's an issue, but it's way overblown. I don't think it's even close to the number one issue, even relating to police-related deaths. I don't think it's the number one issue. I think it's throwing the scent off a bit.
Well, you had that one Biden like admin girl that got famous on Twitter for saying that being anti-war was pro-fascist. So you're totally right, and that's why I like you, Franco. That's why I like the Convo Couch guys and Misty and everybody that I've found on the left that are perfectly aware that the kind of corporate Democrat establishment tries to use like wokeism as a weapon to deny their own involvement in some of these white supremacist and totalitarian systems, to where they can go like, oh, like I know that we actively participate in like oppression of like religious minorities overseas, but we put a Black Lives Matter flag on our corporate $1 billion website.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I'm glad that there are tons of people on the left that are aware that they're trying to like use that as a weapon to cover their own ass.
So I do have a question for all of you before we head over to Rockfin, but I want to give Reed a chance to ask a question.
Let's see. Yeah, Magnus. Do you think unity is likely or just possible? Because I don't think it's likely. I think that somehow people care more about the minute differences they hold than the giant differences they hold with the establishment. I've seen small pockets of hope, but for the most part, people are too brainwashed or they're just too unwilling to talk to each other to let it take place. What's your overall outlook on the possibility of unity?
I think it's way more likely than people have, because a lot of people couch the effectiveness of like a unity movement between like, like dissonant right and dissonant left wing groups kind of coming together to check the government. They base a lot of it on popularity and numbers, to where like that's kind of irrelevant in what we're trying to accomplish. And the people that are most active in a lot of these organizations and the most active activists and content creators and stuff like that are really genuine are the people that will actually make something happen. And more you're starting to see between the people that actually do things, this push towards more of a kind of unity idea, to where the vast majority of people that say that's impossible or are actively antagonistic against it, or work to make sure it never happens, are faceless Twitter idiots and corporate establishments that never go to a protest. They never fought for anything. They have no skin in the game, but they'll sit there and like yell at me and be like, oh, how dare you work with those filthy commies? When it's like, well, what have you ever done? You're a non-entity. You're a non-player character in kind of this like mission that we're all on to make America just maybe slightly less of a horrible shithole for a lot of people. So I think it's more possible than people think.
Okay. So questions.
Can I respond to Reed real quick, or do we need to move to Rockfin?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Give your quick response, and then I'll ask the question.
All right. In terms of what Reed said about white supremacy being overblown, the way I see it is that there's a hyper focus on certain superficial forms of white supremacy, and it's a lot in the realm of symbolism. Symbolism is for the simple-minded. I don't remember who said that, maybe George Carlin, but they want us to look at representation and symbolism and slogans and painting Black Lives Matter on the street, but they don't want to talk about actual material power. They don't want to talk about arming the masses. They don't want to talk about reparations, actual money in people's pockets. And I don't know if we're going to be able to get into this right now, but later I'm going to ask you guys your thoughts on reparations, because that ties into the discussion of collectivism, collective blame, collective responsibility, collective, however you want to phrase it,
Are we really going to get into that right now?
Yeah, if you want to give a quick response to it, you can go ahead. But after that, I'll ask the question for everyone.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't support reparations, but it's because I don't think that blaming me for actually what my ancestors didn't even do. I'm from the North. My ancestors died in the Civil War. So, I don't think that blaming things on people who weren't alive is effective. If there are still oppressive government policies, which I think there are today, then we should focus on removing those. And I think that racism, when it's actually being when you actually see it, you should call it out, and it should be heavily discouraged and heavily shamed in public. But I don't think that individuals who are alive today are responsible for what happened 150 years ago or 70 years ago or 50 years ago. Everyone's responsible for his own actions. So I think that is actually kind of the dangerous form of collectivism I was talking about, when you start blaming a group of people for what happened instead of blaming the actual people who did it.
Here's the thing. I don't expect a low class person or a working class person to pay this at all. I think that's a misconception about reparations. A lot of white people feel like, oh, well, I can't pay that. This is more about expecting the super rich in America, which are mostly white people, to basically give up at least some of it as a concession. I see it as a step towards weakening the ruling class and revolution. And I don't expect any poor white people to pay this. Although there have been certain programs where white people have voluntarily given sums of money to Black organizations. And I agree with that. But I think more the thing is fighting for the American ruling class to be forced to pay what they owe as part of moving towards a real revolution. That's how I see it.
It would be such a long conversation to talk about how you expect this government that just gave trillions of dollars to the top 1% to somehow turn around and start giving it to everyone else. I would challenge that idea first, that's ever going to be a possibility. But I am for stopping giving the 1% all of our money. I think that's somewhere where we should agree. And, so that we can actually choose where our dollars go instead of just sending them to Washington. And then when we hit a financial crisis, they decide to make a bunch of central bankers super fucking rich and a bunch of people in Wall Street and a bunch of corporations, and they pad the military and pad militaries in foreign countries. I would be with you there. I would be with you. Stop sending our fucking money to them. I think that would be a good first step. And then if you can actually get the government to a place where it can even facilitate what you're talking about, then we could have a discussion based on the morals of that. But we're so far removed from that it's not even worth talking about.
I'm interested in getting in this discussion about reparations. I'm also a supporter of it, but yeah, I'm looking forward to having that discussion too, as well as the Second Amendment one, which I think we'll have a lot of agreement there. Last question for you guys before we end the stream here in YouTube. How much of a factor would you guys say class struggle is playing in causing people to break out of U.S. propaganda? Would you guys say it's a significant factor for that, for having people to, break out of that illusion that's promoted by the mainstream media?
Can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So how much of a factor is class struggle playing in waking people up? That's the simplest way for me to say it.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest factor. I think that's kind of the cause of all of this. If you go back 10 years ago, you had this surreal experience where a poor Republican in a trailer thought he had more in common with Rush Limbaugh than he did with his socialist hippie neighbor, and then vice versa. There's been a big push right now within kind of the BLM movement and everything of trying to get people to understand that super wealthy Black individuals don't really represent the actual inner city community that much anymore. And a lot of people are starting to wake up to the fact that the elites in this country have nothing in common with any of us. It doesn't matter what they say they believe or whether they go on and shill one political ideology or another. It's become very clear that kind of the top 1% of the country and the military industrial complex and the police complex and all of these kind of institutions, none of us have anything in common with it. And especially now that these institutions have started targeting all of us. Like I keep bringing up that a John Brown Gun Club BLM guy was arrested by the FBI within a week of a Boogaloo boy being arrested by the FBI for the same bullshit charges. And the more they kind of drop the mask and show that like they think we're all scum and they think that all of us need to be ruled by them and do everything they say and never have any kind of personal agency, the more people are waking up along the class line and everything.
Yeah, I think they've been incredibly good at keeping us divided and making us hate each other. And it seems like the tougher things get, the more we hate each other instead of them. So I think it does play a big role, and it somehow helps them. You would think it would hurt them. You'd think it would cause people to start waking up and realizing what's going on. But it seems like it just, this is... I don't know. I mean, it's because of Trump's tax cuts, or it's because of, immigration, or it's because of whatever. Like, they're just blaming all the issues on the other side instead of realizing, that, I mean, I realized we lived in a failed state when we passed that omnibus bill right before Christmas. That was kind of what broke my back and finally sent me to anarchy, because I was still someone who believed in small government at that time. But when I saw, 59 people out of 538 vote against a bill that they hadn't read, that was 5,500 pages long and said, $2.4 trillion or whatever. At that point, I realized we're fucked. And a part of it was because nobody cared. People were excited for their $600 stimulus check they were going to get and what they could buy Christmas, maybe even. And, no one realized what was going on. So
checks we still haven't got, by the way.
Yeah, it makes me think that, it just makes me realize how effective the establishment is, regardless of how bad the divide becomes. They still seem to be successful at fueling the hatred between the working class on both sides instead of against the ruling class.
I mean, at least from what I see, this is only based on experience. I don't really know any I don't know any people who really hate white people. Like, I live in New York City. I don't think anybody really hates white people. I mean, depends what you mean by hate, but I don't know. It seems to me that there's a lot of white people out there who hate us. I think that's part of the problem, that we could sometimes talk about this whole thing about our country being divided. We talk about it like it's all equal, just stop hating each other. But this is going back to the conversation from before. Like, white people have been historically very vulnerable to this ideology, this supremacist kind of ideology throughout history, time and time again. There are certain individuals that step out of that mold, and I respect that. But, they are few and far between, and I hope that changes in American history.
I just want to clarify that I didn't mean black and white when I meant we hate each other. I meant the right and the left. That was what I was talking about. So
there's an overlap, though, So sort of, at least perceived that there's a racial component,
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
Oh, no. Finish your thoughts, Reed.
No, I was just making sure that people were not saying that I thought it was black versus white. I think it's right versus left. That's still the giant divide in America. And the black population would be mostly on the left, but that's still where I see the biggest divide is between the perceived right and left. Yeah.
Yeah, and off of that fake divide, you get a lot of right-wing people that deny racial issues because they're on the left, so they can't be, honest. They're not trying to defund the police because there's actual issues in the police department. They're trying to defund the police to, secretly get one over on the right wing and hunt right-wing people in the streets and implement weird, death gang. I've heard all this weird shit from Republicans, and it's no, that right left divide has made it to where you don't even see the inner city community struggles with police violence, that you're now chalking it up to some weird political disagreement when that's not even what it's about. And I think that kind of the ability to segregate it down this perfectly divided line of right left has made people like unaware of the racial issues, and if they are aware of them, they put some like bullshit politics on top of it that isn't even like what's going on or what people are talking about, and they try to make it way more like what would be the word I'm looking for? Way more devious and like underhanded and conspiratorial than like a lot of things that people in the inner city are actually asking for, which is way more simple.
I do got to say, this is one of the best back and forths I've ever been a part of, and I'm really glad I'm witnessing it. So everybody, we're about to head over to Rockfin. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. We're going to end the stream here on YouTube, and we will pick up with the conversation that we were getting into about reparations, and as well as the main topic of the Second Amendment. So I'll see you guys there. Thank you, Ali Alexandra and Propaganda, for sharing those links of how you can support this channel, and I'll see you guys there.